What if the person you loved, trusted, and built a life with, was secretly plotting your death? Not a stranger. Not some masked intruder lurking in the shadows. But the person who shared your bed, the one who held your child, the one who kissed you goodnight. What if the people you saw every day, smiling in your face, laughing at your jokes, pretending to have your back, were actually conspiring behind it, making plans to end your life? Now, imagine this. You wake up early for work, just like every other morning. You kiss your child on the forehead. You check your phone, same old messages, same old routine. Maybe you stretch, yawn, let out a deep sigh, already thinking about the long day ahead. You don't know it yet, but your fate has already been sealed. Somewhere, in a dimly lit room, whispers fill the air. A plan is unfolding. The two people you should be able to trust the most, your partner, the mother of your child, and someone you consider a friend, are weaving a story. A story with one goal. To erase you. To make sure you never wake up to another morning. Never kiss your child goodnight again. And the worst part? They want it to look like an accident. A random act of violence. Just another statistic in the headlines. Tragic break-in leaves young father dead. Case closed. No questions asked. But here's the thing about secrets, they don't stay buried for long. This is the story of a devoted father, a hardworking man, and a loving boyfriend, brutally betrayed in the most unthinkable way. A fake home invasion. A staged crime scene. Lies stacked so high, they almost got away with it. Almost. Because the truth? It's far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. And by the end of this story, you'll be asking yourself, how well do we really know the people we trust? Before we dive into this shocking case, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Shocking True Crime Exposed, we uncover the darkest, most twisted cases. Stories that will leave you speechless. And trust me, you don't want to miss this one. His name was James Parker. He was 29 years old. A father. A provider. A man who wanted the best for his family. James wasn't perfect, nobody is, but if you asked anyone who knew him, they'd tell you the same thing. He was kind. Hardworking. The type of man who showed up when it mattered. The type of man who put his child first, who laughed loudly, who never left a friend stranded. He worked long hours as a warehouse supervisor, grinding to create a better future, to give his child opportunities he never had. Maybe he didn't always have the right words. Maybe he wasn't always the best communicator. But you never had to question where his heart was. James had dreams. Plans. A future. But little did he know, the people closest to him were plotting his demise. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She was the mother of his child. The woman he had once loved, trusted. The person he believed would always have his back. But somewhere along the way, love had turned into something else. At first, it was small things, nagging, questioning, little digs here and there. Who were you texting? Why were you late? I know you're lying. At first, James brushed it off. Thought maybe she was just stressed, overwhelmed with motherhood, with life. But over time, it became something darker. More controlling. Sarah wanted him all to herself. Every moment accounted for. Every conversation dissected. Every interaction turned into an argument. She had convinced herself that James was cheating. That he was lying. That one day, he'd walk out and never look back. And in her mind, that was something she couldn't allow. Some say jealousy is just love and hate at the same time. For Sarah, it was a deadly obsession. Then, there was Daniel Brooks. A friend. A coworker. Someone James trusted. But behind the friendly smiles and casual conversations, something sinister was brewing. Was it a secret relationship with Sarah? A hidden grudge? Or was it just the twisted thrill of getting away with the ultimate crime? What's clear is this: Sarah and Daniel were in it together. And the worst part? James had no idea. He went to work, joked around, grabbed lunch, shared stories about his kid with this person, never knowing he was standing shoulder to shoulder with someone who had already decided his fate. And it all happened in Maplewood, Ohio, a town so small, it felt like a family. A place where people left their doors unlocked. Where everybody knew everybody. Where real crime was something you watched on TV, not something that happened to someone you knew. A place where people smiled at each other in the grocery store. Where small talk at the gas station was just part of life. Where the most exciting thing that happened all year was the county fair or a big football game. It was the kind of town where tragedy wasn't supposed to happen. But behind closed doors, behind the neatly mowed lawns and holiday decorations, darkness was creeping in. The illusion of a perfect life was about to shatter. And nobody saw it coming. At first, it was just small things. Little disagreements. Sarah Mitchell had always been a bit possessive, a little quick to anger, but James Parker never thought much of it. They had a child together. They had history. And like most couples, they had their ups and downs. But over time, the downs became more frequent. What started as normal relationship arguments slowly turned into something more toxic, more suffocating. Sarah wasn't just asking where he was, she was tracking his location. She wasn't just questioning who he was talking to, she was going through his phone while he slept. She wasn't just insecure, she was convinced he was cheating. And once she made up her mind, there was no changing it. Sarah became obsessed. Every time James came home late, it was a fight. Every time his phone buzzed, it was an interrogation. Who is she? You think I'm stupid? Just admit it, James. I know you're sneaking around. But there was no other woman. James was exhausted. His only crime? Working late. Providing for his family. Trying to keep everything together while Sarah spiraled deeper and deeper into her own paranoia. But what James didn't realize, was that someone else had entered the equation. Someone who wasn't just fueling Sarah's suspicions, he was feeding them. Daniel Brooks had been James' co-worker for years. At work, he was just another guy. Friendly. Laid back. The kind of person you'd grab a beer with after a long shift. But outside of work, Daniel had secrets. No one knows exactly when it started, but somewhere along the way, he became closer to Sarah than he should have been. Maybe it started as innocent conversation. Maybe it was just venting, complaining about James, playing the role of the concerned friend. But soon, Daniel was in Sarah's ear all the time. And what he was saying? It wasn't innocent. You know, James is always at work late, maybe he's not actually working. You deserve better, Sarah. You shouldn't have to put up with this. If I were with you, I'd never treat you like that. Every little seed of doubt, every whisper, every comment, it was pushing Sarah further into the idea that James was a liar. A cheater. Someone who didn't deserve her. And Daniel? Maybe he saw an opportunity. Maybe he wanted Sarah for himself. Maybe he had his own reasons for wanting James out of the picture. But whatever the reason was, one thing became clear. They were in this together. And they were about to take it to the next level. There's a moment in every crime story. A moment where the line is crossed. Where fantasy turns into reality. Where what started as just thoughts, dark, angry, jealous thoughts, becomes something much more dangerous. For Sarah and Daniel, that moment came late one night. The fighting between Sarah and James had gotten worse. She was furious. Accusations were flying, voices were raised. James had had enough. I'm done, Sarah. I can't do this anymore. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't being cruel. He was just tired. But to Sarah, it was confirmation of her worst fear. James was going to leave her. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, he'd walk out that door and never come back. And in her mind, she wasn't going to let that happen. So that night, after James went to bed, Sarah picked up her phone. She texted Daniel. "We need to do it." And that was it. That was the moment. The moment jealousy turned into murder. The moment Sarah and Daniel made the deadliest decision of their lives. A decision that would leave a child without a father. A family shattered. And an entire town wondering. How could two people be so heartless? How could someone pretend to love you, while secretly planning your death? But Sarah and Daniel didn't care about any of that. Because in their minds, they had already made up their minds. And they weren't going back. Because if Sarah couldn't have James, no one could. James had no idea. He woke up that morning like any other day. Stretched, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, checked his phone. Messages from work. A few from Sarah, nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe he yawned, shuffled into the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face. Maybe he looked at himself in the mirror, tired but still pushing forward. If only he knew that outside his door, the people he loved were making sure this would be the last morning he'd ever see. The plan was simple, at least, that's what Sarah and Daniel thought. Make it look like a burglary. A tragic, senseless crime. A statistic. Another headline lost in a sea of violence. The kind of crime that happens too fast, with no witnesses, no suspects, no real investigation. Just another case of someone being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Except James was in the right place. His own home. And the people who should have been his safe space. They were the ones behind the mask. The night before, Sarah and Daniel went over the plan again and again. It had to be perfect. No loose ends. No mistakes. They would make it look like a robbery gone wrong. A forced entry. A scuffle. A struggle that led to tragedy. Daniel would be the one to do it. He was stronger. He knew how to fight. And most importantly, he had nothing to lose. Sarah's role. The grieving girlfriend. The devastated mother. The woman who would play the part so well that no one would ever suspect her. She practiced her tears in the mirror. She imagined herself sobbing on the phone with 911. She pictured the police arriving, the way she would shake, collapse in the doorway, clutch her child to her chest and convince the world she had lost everything. But what she didn't realize, was that murder is never that simple. And no matter how much you plan, the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks. James was exhausted when he came home that night. He dropped his keys on the counter, kicked off his shoes, and sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. Another long shift. Another day of breaking his back for a family he thought he was protecting. Sarah was quiet. Too quiet. But James was too tired to notice. His daughter was already asleep. The house was dark except for the glow of the TV. A normal night. Or so he thought. Because at that exact moment, just a few blocks away, Daniel Brooks was sitting in his car. Gloves on. Mask ready. Knife in his pocket. Waiting. His heart pounded. His breath was shaky. But there was no turning back now. At 1:37 a.m., Sarah sent the text. Now. It was just past 1:30 a.m. when James finally drifted off to sleep. The house was quiet. The baby monitor hummed softly in the background. The glow of the television flickered against the walls. And then, a sudden crash. A loud, violent noise, shattering the silence. James jolted awake. His heart was pounding. His mind was still groggy, confused. Was that the front door? Then, footsteps. Heavy. Rushed. Coming straight toward him. Before he could even react, a shadow appeared in the doorway. And then, the first hit. A blunt force to the head. The world spinning. His vision blurring. Pain exploded through his skull as he stumbled back, grasping at the air, at anything to steady himself. What the hell? Then, another hit. Harder. Faster. A sudden, sharp, white-hot pain in his side. James gasped, staggered, tried to fight back, but he was disoriented, his body struggling to keep up with the horror unfolding in front of him. This wasn't a robbery. No one was screaming for valuables. No one was demanding money. This was an execution. James fought. He pushed back. He reached out, his fingers grazing the fabric of the attacker's hoodie. And for just a second, their eyes locked. And in that moment, James saw him. Not a stranger. Not a masked intruder. Daniel. His coworker. His friend. James' mind was spinning, his body drenched in adrenaline, his heart racing in panic. Why? Why was Daniel here? Why was he attacking him? James tried to call out, his voice thick, weak. Daniel. But Daniel didn't stop. Another hit. A knee to the ribs. A hand pressing against his throat. James gasped, his breath hitching, his vision fading in and out. And then, another voice. Soft. Familiar. Sarah. She was standing there. Watching. James' body shuddered. His brain refused to understand it. Why wasn't she helping him? She wasn't screaming. She wasn't running. She wasn't terrified, she was calm. And then, it hit him. This was never a break-in. This was never a random attack. This was murder. Sarah had set him up. And in that final, excruciating moment, as James' body weakened, as his lungs struggled for air, he knew. The people he loved, had betrayed him. It was done. James lay on the floor, his body still, his breath shallow. The room was eerily silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the faint, steady drip of something warm, pooling beneath him. Daniel was breathing hard. His hands trembled. His clothes were stained, dark, sticky, undeniable. Sarah just stood there, staring at James. It was real now. No turning back. For a split second, just a second, she hesitated. But then, she snapped back into character. She rushed to her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. The moment the operator answered, she let out a blood-curdling scream. Oh my God, someone broke in, he's not breathing. Her voice cracked, so convincing, so utterly believable that no one would ever think she was lying. The operator's voice was calm, steady, professional. Ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath, tell me what happened. Sarah sobbed. I heard a noise, I woke up and there was someone in the house, he's been stabbed, please, hurry. Daniel was already out the back door, vanished into the night. The intruder. Sarah fell to her knees, rocking back and forth, clutching her own hair, as if she was in complete shock. By the time the police arrived, she was hysterical. Tears. Hyperventilating. Clutching onto her child, pressing the baby against her chest like she was the only thing she had left. The officers rushed inside. And there, in the dim glow of the television, James Parker lay motionless on the floor. A father. A provider. A man who never saw it coming. Sarah screamed again as she saw his body, loud, heartbreaking, award-winning. And as the officers tried to calm her down, as they swept the house, looking for the intruder that never existed. Sarah held her baby tight. Her tears were real. But not because she was grieving. Not because she was in shock. But because, in that moment, she believed she had gotten away with it. The crime scene was chaotic, but not in the way it should have been. To the untrained eye, it looked like a violent home invasion. A struggle. A senseless act of brutality. But to the detectives, something felt off. It was too staged. Too controlled. Too convenient. When the first officers arrived on scene, they expected to see signs of a forced entry, a broken window, a busted lock, something that showed how the intruder had gotten in. But there was nothing. The front door was unlocked. There were no pry marks. No shattered glass. And that wasn't the only problem. Nothing was stolen. James Parker was attacked inside the home, but every valuable item, his wallet, his electronics, even a stack of cash sitting on the kitchen counter, was untouched. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. At first, Sarah Mitchell played her part perfectly. She sobbed. She screamed. She collapsed into the arms of the officers, her body shaking with grief. It all happened so fast, she gasped, I heard a noise, and then I saw him, oh God, there was blood everywhere. She described a masked intruder. A large man, dressed in black, who had broken into their home, attacked James, and fled before she could even react. It sounded believable. Too believable. But as the detectives listened, watched her carefully, something wasn't right. Her tears were there, but they were convenient. Her voice cracked, but only when the officers were looking at her. And then came the biggest red flag of all. The neighbors had security cameras. And those cameras? They didn't show anyone breaking in. Not a single soul approached the house that night. Which meant Sarah was lying. Detectives dug deeper. They pulled phone records. Checked call logs. Scrutinized Sarah's every move. And within hours, the cracks in her story split wide open. The text messages. They found messages between Sarah and Daniel Brooks, messages that shouldn't have existed. Hours before the murder, Sarah had sent a text, I can't do this anymore. And Daniel had replied, tonight. No more waiting. The phone call logs. Just minutes after James had been attacked, Sarah had called Daniel first. Not 911. Not the police. Daniel. The missing panic. Sarah claimed she had woken up to the sound of an intruder. But in the 911 call, there was no genuine fear. No sounds of her running. No sounds of her hiding. She knew exactly what was happening. And the final piece of the puzzle? Daniel Brooks' alibi collapsed in seconds. Sarah was in the middle of her grieving widow act when the detectives walked back in. This time, they weren't there to comfort her. They were there to arrest her. Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for the murder of James Parker. For the first time since that night, her face changed. The fake grief vanished. Her body stiffened. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Because deep down, she knew. It was over. And an hour later, just a few miles away, Daniel Brooks was pulled out of his apartment in handcuffs. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. The community that had once believed Sarah's lies now sat, wide-eyed, horrified, waiting for the truth. The prosecutors laid it out step by step. The toxic relationship. The jealousy. The weeks of planning. The fake break-in. And the cold, brutal betrayal of a man who never saw it coming. Sarah sat motionless. No tears. No sobbing. Just cold. Empty. And then, the most chilling moment of all, when Daniel took the stand. He cracked. He turned on Sarah. He told the jury everything. She planned it. She wanted him dead. She told me to do it, she said it was the only way. The courtroom was silent. Sarah clenched her jaw, her fingers gripping the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Because in that moment, she knew. She was going down. It took the jury less than 4 hours to decide. Sarah Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. Daniel Brooks was found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy. Sarah was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Daniel? 45 years behind bars. Justice was served. But was it enough? A little girl lost her father. A family was shattered forever. And James Parker? A man who had worked, struggled, fought for his family, had never stood a chance. Because the people he trusted the most had already decided his fate. And in the end, no amount of justice could bring him back. There's something chilling about this case. Something that goes beyond the crime itself. Yes, it was brutal. Yes, it was calculated. But the part that haunts people the most? It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random act of violence. James Parker was murdered by the people he trusted the most. His own girlfriend. The mother of his child. And a man he called a friend. That's what makes this case so terrifying. Because if the people closest to you could be planning your murder while smiling in your face. How well do we really know the people we love? How many times have we ignored the red flags? Brushed off the warning signs? Told ourselves, they wouldn't do that to me. James probably told himself the same thing. Until it was too late. This case is more than just a tragic story. It's a warning. A warning about toxic relationships. About control. About jealousy that festers and turns into something deadly. Because jealousy isn't always just an argument. It's not always just an insecure text message. Sometimes, jealousy is a slow-burning fire, one that starts small, almost invisible, but if left unchecked, it consumes everything in its path. Sarah Mitchell convinced herself of a lie, that James was betraying her. That she had to act first. That if she couldn't have him, no one could. And that belief? It was enough to make her take his life. This is why toxic relationships are dangerous. Because sometimes, the person you sleep next to at night could be the one planning your funeral. So, let me ask you this. If this could happen to James Parker, a hardworking father, a man who just wanted to provide for his family, how many other people are living with a secret enemy right now? How many people are ignoring the signs, trusting the wrong person, never realizing that they're sleeping with their own worst nightmare? Think about that. If you found this case shocking, there's more where that came from. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because here at Shocking True Crime Exposed, we uncover the darkest, most twisted stories, the ones that make you question everything you thought you knew. Drop a comment below. Do you think Sarah Mitchell's sentence was enough? Do you believe Daniel Brooks deserved a harsher punishment? Or do you think there's still more to this story? Let's talk about it. And before you go, check out these other cases that will leave you absolutely speechless via our playlist. Because in the world of true crime, the scariest stories aren't the ones you see in movies. They're the ones happening in real life.